Maxwell, read, books from John Maxwell. One of those books by him is, Good Leaders Ask Great Questions. So he's asking me these great and these challenging questions, but to be honest with you, it's kind of freaking me out. Because the revelation, the realization that I'm about to be a dad came to mind. And I could really begin to think about everything that comes along with that. And so, you start running through your mind the what ifs, the things that you don't know that could happen, and you begin to ask the questions of yourself. Can I really handle this? And don't get me wrong, I knew that having a baby was no small thing. When you have a child, you got a lot of stuff you got to do. It's expensive. My son is now 19 months old, and he is into everything. He was at my mother-in-law's house, and he was just taking every little thing that he could find. He opened up the microwave. He tried to put a coffee mug in the microwave because this is what he sees. And so he's taking this stuff in. And so you're running around trying to keep up with him. And, and at that moment, when I was considering that we were about to have this child, these different things started running through my mind. I have to protect him. And not only him, but now I also have to treat my wife in a different way. Because now she's transitioning. Not from just being my wife, and coming home and cooking me dinner and stuff like that, but now she's coming home and she has to be a mom as well. And so all these things just started, running through my mind. We waited, been together for 10 years at that time. And we were married, I think, for about 4 or 5 years. And we said that we were going to wait before we had any kids. But how many people know that, particularly with a child, sometimes no matter how much we plan and how much we prepare, sometimes we still find ourselves asking the question, am I enough? Am I good enough? Will I be able to handle, this new challenge that's coming on? I believe that all of us have felt that way at some point. Maybe it's not a baby, maybe it's your job, or maybe it's a relationship, or maybe it's with school. Maybe it's with your business, or maybe it's, it's even with your ministry. And so, I ask the question, what happens when you find yourself sometimes overcompensating for something that you were never meant to be perfect at? Let me say that again. What happens when you find yourself overcompensating for something that God never called you to be perfect at? We start saying stuff, sometimes, and I've seen it, and I'm guilty of it myself. You go on social media, and sometimes you talk to friends and everything, and, we start saying things like, I'm a boss. I got this. I ain't worried about this. I ain't worried about that. We start to say certain things about ourselves, but do we really believe those things? Or are we just saying those things because what we're trying to do is overcompensate for something that we were never called to be perfect at? And so, even though, sometimes we say those things and, we don't really believe it because they're kind of just empty words. So we try to fill this void called enough. And so since that time, I've learned something that's been really vital to me, right? I've learned that enough is a perspective. Say that with me. Enough is a perspective. Enough is a perspective. Let me explain. In our text this morning, we find Moses, the Israelites, Aaron and the Israelites, they've just come to the land that God had promised to them. Canaan, the land of milk and honey. It was a place that they left Egypt for, and God promised them, He told them, I have prepared this place for you to take possession of it. And so God told Moses to send out 12 men, 12 leaders, to scout out the land for 40 days and then report back what it was that they saw. They came back and said that indeed the land was there. It was filled with milk and honey. And they even brought back some of the fruit to show what was there. So they saw exactly what it was that God had promised them, but they also saw something else. They saw other groups of people living there. They saw the Amalekites, they saw the Hittites, they saw the Jebusites, they saw the Amorites, they saw the Canaanites. All the ites are in the place. Excuse me. This meant that there were a bunch of obstacles that they had to face. All were considered strong. They were considered to be well-defended areas. And if that wasn't enough, they reported that they saw some giants out there. More specifically, you look at the history of what he was talking about dealing with the giants. There were 3 giants. And in the middle of their report, one of the leaders, Caleb, says, "Let us go up at once and take possession of it, for we will certainly conquer it." So in other words, Caleb's like, yo, let's go get it. Let's go get to it. There's our promise right there from God. So let's put this play into motion. But the others said, nah, bro, we can't do that. They said, we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so were we in their sight. And this is what I discovered when I was reading that text. You can't expect anybody to treat you like the child of God that you are if you don't even see yourself that way. If you see yourself as small, then your battles will see you as small. If you see yourself as being small, then your challenges will look at you as being small. Listen, what God has for you and I is massive, it's big, but it requires some massive thinking and some massive understanding of exactly who we are in God. And what I discovered is that if we don't have our mind wrapped around it, then we will lose our way back down to the level of our leadership if we don't grow to the place that God has called us to. I'll say that again. You will lose your way back down to the level of your leadership if you do not raise and elevate your thinking to the level that God has called you to. If you see yourself so small that you don't even begin to try to do what it is that God has called you to do, then you will stay in a place that ends up being called regret. So their perspective of the situation was wrong. Say it with me again. Enough is a perspective. Let me ask you a question. What does enough really look like and mean to you? How do you see enough in your own life? Is enough based on the status of your bank account? Is enough based on your health? Is enough based on your relationships? Let's say if it was based on your bank account. Let's say your number was $5 million. Let's just say that God miraculously just dropped $5 million into your bank account. You would shout, you would praise God, you would, run around the church, you would be excited. And don't get me wrong, I would love to have that as well. I'm just like you. But what happens when you get the $5 million, but then you get a diagnosis of cancer? Is enough placed in your abilities, your skills, and your talents? Because you can master your skill today and then begin to develop Alzheimer's and forget everything that you just mastered. Is enough in your relationship? Because you could get the spouse and end up finding yourself sitting in the mirror, putting on makeup, covering up black eyes and bruises all over your body. I'm not trying to be morbid. I'm not trying to, be depressing in what I'm saying, but I'm not saying that you shouldn't have hope and that you shouldn't strive for greatness, because God has certainly called us to greater. He said that in Him that we have life and life abundantly, and so God called us to strive for greatness in every area, in every way. But what I'm trying to do is make a point that how we view enough and define ourselves cannot be in what we achieve or control or manipulate. It can't be in people or money. It can't be in our abilities. It has to be in something that is stable and loving and powerful and gracious. It has to be on a solid rock and not on a rubber crutch. Enough is a perspective. But look at the scripture, right? It says that there were only 3 giants there. But all of the Israelites who came to this place were walking in the promise of God. That part kind of intrigued me for a minute. I said, yeah, there's some giants there. Got 3 of them. You got, all these other nations and everything. Yeah, they're there, but they're walking in the promise of God. Realistically, it really only takes one person to be walking in the will and the power of the Almighty to achieve success. But the funny thing is that they had an entire nation who had received the promise. And yet they stood there looking like some shook ones. All because of what they said. What they said. Who are the days in your life? Or better yet, what are the days in your life? Let me tell you something. When you have God's promise, and you have God's power on your side, there are no obstacles that can limit you from reaching what it is that God has for you. Amen. And when you get together with some people who are walking in that same direction, who are determined just like you, the Bible says that all you really need are 2 or 3, and there God is in the midst. Maybe the problem isn't just that you're seeing yourself wrong. It's that you surrounded yourself with people who don't even see greater for themselves. How many people know that negativity is contagious? And if you're already broken, and if you're already feeling defeated by the circumstances of life, the enemy himself will be sure to bring negativity into your atmosphere. You have to treat that stuff almost like it's the coronavirus. You have to tell people, I love you and everything, but I got to put my mask on. I can't take in what it is that you got going on. I'm going to separate myself because I don't want to be infected with the negativity that you have in your life. Sometimes you got to tell people, it's not you, it's me. And then again, maybe just be honest. No, it's you. So you might have to replace some of the days in your life with a team. A team that has similar instincts to grow and to succeed, but they have a different perspective and they have different gifts than you. Because sometimes we can get boxed in and we can surround ourselves with people who are just like us because, sometimes we get a little infatuated with ourselves. And so we want to see a reflection of ourselves as opposed to seeing the reflection of God. And the way that we can see the reflection of God is sometimes we surround ourselves with people who don't necessarily look like us, who don't talk like us, who don't necessarily even think like us, but they have a propensity to chase after God. And when you surround yourself with the right people, you can achieve greater success. I was talking with a friend one day, who happens to be named Tim as well, and he and I were talking, and he said that he went on Instagram and he just began to unfollow a bunch of Instagram accounts that he was following. And when I asked him why, he said, because I realized that I'm not looking for them or at them as inspiration for the work that I do. I'm not looking at them anymore as, a source of growth that would challenge me. I'm beginning to look at them as competition. I'm beginning to look at them in a way that's frustrating me because I'm not at the place that they are. We often find ourselves being defined by what other people say and by what other people are doing. We try to please other people. We try to satisfy certain internal needs certain needs that we have to what's the word that I'm looking for? Help me, Holy Spirit. We're trying to find something that makes us feel like we have achieved a certain level. We are looking for something that validates us. That's it. We're looking for validation in places that really were never called to validate us. And so we measure ourselves by a standard that God never set for us. And the only standard that we really need to be concerned with is the grace of God. It's not about they, it's about Him. But here's the thing that I realize is that even with the days, with the voices, with the opinions, with the things that we read and the things that we see, because we're bombarded with so much information, those things don't necessarily defeat us. They might hinder us. They might hold us back, just like those leaders who went and scouted out the land. They ended up holding back the children of Israel from, walking toward their promise. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's defeating you. You won't necessarily be defeated by they, by what they say about you, but you can almost definitely be defeated by what you say about you. What do you do when your thoughts are louder than God's voice? Here's the thing, I learned, or I thought about this, I knew that the key to being saved was in my heart. I believe in my heart, if I confess in my mouth, believe in my heart, that the Lord Jesus Christ and God raised from the dead, I shall be saved. I knew that part. But nobody told me that the key to living was in my mind. I realized that there's a danger in an unchecked and an unmanaged insecurity. And after you've lived with it for a while, it almost becomes like second nature. And you begin to rehearse the negativity. You begin to rehearse the insecurity over and over again. Okay, I'll give you an example. You ever go decide that you want to get a new car, and you go to the dealership and you test drive the car, you like the car, you're not necessarily ready to buy it yet, or maybe you already bought it, and you begin to realize, or you begin to see that car everywhere you go. Didn't notice the car before, but now all of a sudden, you just bought yourself this brand new Honda Civic, and everywhere you look, man, he's got a Civic. Oh, she's driving the Civic too. Didn't notice it before. Isn't it crazy how sometimes we begin to rehearse the things that we have in our mind? Did you realize that the same thing happens with negativity and insecurity? Before you know it, you find yourself seeing what you see. I'll say that again. Before you realize it, you begin seeing what it is that you see. Because you're accustomed to it. You've conditioned your mind for it. You've conditioned even your heart toward it. And you tend to hear and see all of those negative things that confirm what you already think. So if I think that I'm not good enough to do something, I will begin to see that thing. I will begin to hear it. It's almost like I'm feeding myself over and over again and believing and convincing myself that I'm enough because now I have been conditioned to believe that. So the question is, how do we begin to live in a world where no matter what we experience, we know that we are enough? I think that over the past month, Pastor Tim was talking about I am the problem. And now as we're transitioning into a place, into first Sunday of February, which is the love month, Valentine's Day and everything like that. One of the things that I thought about is that a part of our problem is how we don't love ourselves. And then we begin to believe that we are not enough, but beyond that, because when we don't love ourselves, we're looking at ourselves so much and focusing ourselves so much on what we see about us that we're not seeing the full picture of what God has said about us. It's almost like looking into a mirror and Pastor Tim, I should have asked you to give me a mirror, man. It's almost like looking at a mirror and you take sticky notes of everything that you feel about yourself, and you begin to fill that mirror with those sticky notes of negativity, those sticky notes of insecurity, and you're not looking at the full picture because you can't see it. So how do we begin to walk in a place where we realize that we are enough, or that we can feel like we are enough. I can be honest with you and tell you the truth. The honest truth is that we are not. We are not enough. And I'm going to tell you why. There's still hope in this, but in all honesty, we're not enough. Let me tell you. Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 9, he said, "For I am the least of the apostles, who am not worthy to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church." So let me give you a little background on this real quick, and then I'll make my point and I'll be out your way. He says, well, before this dialogue with Paul, he went through a list of people who had seen Jesus. He's trying to make his point about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. He mentions how first Cephas and then the 12 saw him. Then he said a group of 500 saw him, and then James and the apostles. But then he mentions in verse 8, right before verse 9, he says that he was the very last one to see Jesus. And that he himself was like a quote-unquote baby outside of his time. In other words, he was saying he was almost like not even a premature baby, but he came out as a child who was a stillborn baby. He said all of these others came out and they were fully grown, but here I am persecuting the church. Here I am persecuting Christians. God said, and Paul says, look at me. I wasn't even fully born yet when I saw Jesus. So he said, I'm weak. I was unable to see. I was pretty much dead. In comparison to everybody else who encountered Jesus, I was the opposite of ready. So it sounds like Paul, who today we know has written the majority of the New Testament, who is a towering biblical figure, doesn't feel like he was enough. He says, I'm not worthy to be called an apostle because I persecuted the church. Not only was I basically stillborn, but I was in opposition with God. Has anybody ever felt that way before? Have you ever felt like your lifestyle or your thoughts are not completely in line with God's will for your life? It almost causes you to feel a level of shame. Look at what Paul says. He says, this is good. But by the grace of God, I am what I am. And he says, his grace toward me was not in vain, but I labored more abundantly than all of them, yet not I, but the grace of God, which was with me. Amen. Let me help you. If you could find the I'm not enough in your life and get that thing into your mind, the place that you feel like that you're not good enough in, the place that you feel like you could be strong in, the place that you just wish, if I could get this thing together, I would be great. If you can get that thing in your mind and just tell it, I am what I am. So what you're not blank enough. So what you're not strong. So what you're not tall, so what you're not wealthy, so what you're not smart, you don't feel that you are enough. It's not about how adequate I am, it's about how sufficient God is. So here's the thing, it was never really about me. It was the grace of God. It was not my driving skills that kept me from getting in the accident. It was the grace of God. It was not my skill in maneuvering in relationships that allowed me to build a business and network. It was the grace of God. It was not my ability to speak. It was not my ability to stand before people and preach. It was the grace of God. It was not my ability. It was not by my own will that I was able to purchase a house. It was the grace of God. It is not about how good I look. It's not about how good I feel. It's about the grace of God. I want you to know that if you're experiencing I want you to know that essentially, if what you've been taught and things that you learned as you were growing up, whether from your parents or maybe even in church, has put you into performance with God, I want you to know that it's God's grace that keeps us. I want you to know that if your competitive nature is the reason behind your feelings of inadequacy, then I want to set you free right now. You cannot compete your way into righteousness. You cannot perform your way into godly success. Here's the thing. It's not our own, it is our own performance-based faith that really condemns us. Yeah. It's how we challenge ourselves and how we begin to get into a race against God sometimes, that we begin to feel condemned, because in reality, we can't do this thing by ourselves. And when you recognize the reality of who you are, you don't need social media posts to prove to people who you are. God said, I am that I am. And that you were made in his very image. So it makes sense now when Paul says, I am who I am. Why should you worry about what people think about you? They didn't die for you. They didn't shed their blood for you. They didn't go up on a hill called Calvary and hang up on a cross and face beating and whips and everything like that for you. Let's be real. Let's be real about it. If we're really honest with ourselves, it's truly not about them, about what people say. It's really about you and what you think. You and I cannot expect to live a life on a diet of sugary, fattening opinions of other people. Those things that'll bring you up and then drop you right back down. Your peace can only be found in the one of substance. Amen. So what if the battles seem bigger to you? So what if you're facing those giants? You have a promise from the master of the universe himself. And that's why you continue to fight on. No matter the circumstances, no matter what you face, blood, sweat, and tears, pulling your hair out, pacing the floor, sleepless nights, even if you got to argue with yourself to remind yourself that this is what God said, then you do it, but you don't quit. Matter of fact, you really don't even have to stress about it. You don't have to pace the floor. You don't have to pull your hair out. Let me tell you why. Because David said in Psalm 3 that, oh, how they have increased around me who trouble me. Many are they that rise up against me. But in the middle of him writing this psalm, he said, but I laid down and I went to sleep. For the Lord sustained me. I would not be afraid of the tens of thousands of people who have set themselves up against me. I declare over you right now in this place that you will have peace in the middle of your battle. I declare right now that no matter the circumstances, no matter how many challenges, no matter how many bills, no matter how many people are talking about you, I declare right now that when you go home tonight, you will lay down with a peace that you have never had before. That you will go to sleep in a peace right now and tonight that you have never experienced in your life before. That this entire week will be filled with peace. You will be walking around just feeling like, you know what, I'm good. I'm not worried about it. I don't care what's going on around me because God is on my side. Amen. Listen, if Jesus walked into this building today, nothing we could do, nothing we could offer would be enough to satisfy the requirement of the honor that his kingship requires. There's nothing you nor I could do to fully praise and worship him in all of his greatness. The Bible says that if I had 10,000 tongues, it wouldn't be enough. Oh, but by the grace of God. It's not by my power, it's not by my might, but it's by his Spirit, by his provision, it's by his blood. If his blood was good enough for Paul, if his blood was good enough for Peter, if his blood was good enough for all of those who saw him, if his blood was good enough for every single harlot, every single liar, every single sinner that we find in this book, maybe I should make this a little more practical. If his blood was good enough for Pastor Tim, if his blood was good enough for Kevin, if his blood was good enough for my wife Mary, then his blood is good enough for you. Somebody say, I am enough. I am enough, not so much because of what I can do, but because of who God is. This is what I discovered, that God will show up in your story. And so this is what I learned, that having not enough is just enough. You can't do it all by yourself. You know where the anxiety came from in your life? It came from God allowing you to get into a position where you're overwhelmed so that you can come to the realization and the revelation of just how good He is. So this is the opportunity where you can let go of your burdens, you can let go of the guilt, you can let go of the shame of not being able to be all things to all people at all times. This is a time where you can forgive yourself for not having or being enough. There's so much pressure on us to be more than enough to people and to situations that we are in. But I want to set you free this morning and let you know that none of us are enough. But with God, we have more than enough. Look at your neighbor and tell your neighbor, I will fail you. I am not perfect. I don't have it all together. But I'm going to let you know right now that if God is on my side, I can handle it. We can get some stuff done if I have God on my side. I lost some friends because I wasn't enough. Amen. I wasn't enough to match their expectations. And I'll be honest with you, at first it bothered me. But eventually you get to a place where you move past it and you keep on living, because despite your shortcomings, we still have a purpose to fulfill, a destiny to reach. And I refuse to let something like that, or somebody who feels like I'm inadequate, I refuse to let those things push me into a box of insecurity any longer. Last week, we suffered the loss of a national treasure, international treasure. Suddenly, I almost didn't even feel real. We lost the legend Kobe Bryant, as well as his daughter Gianna, and several others who we don't necessarily know by name. That we don't see them because they weren't in the spotlight like Kobe was. But one of the things that I loved about Kobe, I was a Lakers fan, and one of the things that I loved about Kobe was this thing called the Mamba mentality. It was his ideology on work and performance and self-limitations. He defined it as being able to constantly try to be the best version of yourself. One thing he said that stuck with me was about crossing the finish line. He said when he's training, he's running on the track, he begins to feel worn out, he looks far away, and he just sees just how far away that finish line is. And when he looks at it, he becomes even more tired. You ever been in that place? You're sitting at work, you look up at the clock, man, I got to hold it out. So you sit there and you keep on working, you type and you click your mouse, and you're like, I feel like I know a good 45 minutes just went by. You look at the clock, it's only been 2 minutes. The funny thing is that, sometimes we measure what God has promised to take us with where we are now, and we get discouraged. It's taking too long, it's too difficult. I'm getting tired, I'm getting worn out. Kobe said that he makes the decision that he's going to make it to the end, despite how he feels. Because he believes there's something within him to do it. And instead of looking at the finish line, this is what got me. He said instead of looking at the finish line, he looks down and focuses on his own 2 feet. What if instead of worrying about the end result, you focus on what God is doing in you right now? Amen. What if instead of looking at your social media feed, measuring yourself against what everybody else is doing, you set your sight on what God is doing in the timeline of your own life? And see, this is the thing that blessed me about Kobe's method, keeping his head down. Because in order for me to look at my feet as I run, I have to bow my head, keep my head bowed. And so, if I'm on the finish line, or I'm on the track trying to make it to the finish line. I know the finish line is way over there, and now I'm tired. I see it, I'm like, man, it's so far away, I'm going to quit. You look down, and you say, God, I'm struggling. God, I'm trying to make it. I think I can do it, though. And what you realize is that you're in a posture of worship. You realize that you're now in a posture to realize just how good God is. My own 2 feet are moving. And now I can see God in a different way. Because instead of looking down there, I'm in a posture of surrender. I'm in a posture where I can give it over to God. I'm in a posture where I can give him praise. I'm in a posture where I know I can now make it. Because I'm no longer thinking about myself. I'm no longer worried about that. Yeah, I'm tired. Yeah, I'm struggling. Yeah, I can feel it. But I'm in a position where I'm not looking at what situation is going on around me. I'm staying focused on where God has me. And so now I'm not worried about all of the problems. I'm not worried about how I feel. Yes, God, my legs hurt. Yes, God, my body hurts. And I need everything that you have to help me. But how many people know that God will supply every single need that you have? Amen. And as I'm looking at my own situation, I realize I am enough. But I'm not enough. I'm enough, but I'm not enough. Kevin is not enough. But Kevin with God, I'm enough. If I keep looking down, I realize that there's some type of connection here. So the reason you feel like you've had enough is because you feel like you are not enough. And so yes, I might be the problem, but I've come this morning, bro, to let you know that I know the solution. Maybe your perspective this morning, this entire time has been wrong. Maybe you've been looking at the sentence wrong. The sentence of, am I enough? The sentence of, I'm not enough. The negative self-talk, the opinions of others. So this whole time I thought to myself, am I enough? Can I really do this? So when I see it from God's perspective, I see I am enough. Here's the thing, I am is capitalized. It's not about me, but in all caps, I am enough. I am that I am. It's a name that God told Moses to call him. If they ask me who I am, tell them I am that I am. And so now I realize that I am enough. Everything that you are not, God said, I am. Let me prove it to you. I'm going to prove it to you right now. Listen to what Paul said in 2 Corinthians 9 and 8. I didn't give you this, Josh, my bad. But this is what he said in the Amplified version. He said, and God is able to make all grace. In the Amplified it says, every favor and earthly blessing come in abundance to you, so that you may always, under all circumstances, regardless of your need, have complete sufficiency in everything. Being completely self-sufficient, watch this, in him, and have an abundance for every good work and act of charity. And see, that was good. That was good, but I'm going to bring it down to you. I'm going to read it in a version that I've never seen before called the Passion Translation. The Passion Translation says, yes, God is more than ready to overwhelm you with every form of grace, so that you have, get this, more than enough of everything. Every moment and in every way, he will make you overflow with abundance in every good thing that you do. How did Paul know that God could do it? Because he experienced it for himself. Paul was broken. Paul was a lost. Paul was a sinner. He was persecuting the church, but his perspective with God has now changed. It wasn't about what he could do, but about what God had already done. So now he can testify that God will do it. Because if he did it for him, he'll do it for me. He can testify that God will favor you. He can say that God will be more than enough in your life. Let me make this practical for you. God is saying that I am more than enough for you, Growth Church. I am more than enough in the hospital. I am more than enough in your finances. I am more than enough for your situation. He always answers when I call. He never sends me to voicemail. He doesn't have his phone on Do Not Disturb. Every time I call on God, he makes himself available. God said, this is the time to come and talk to him because you know he's got it. Yeah. Every time I need him, he's right there. Not just on time, but God is before time. Before the foundations of the world, God said that he knew you. When you were still being formed in your mom's belly, he knew you. He knew every hair on your head. He knew every situation that you would face. And yet God said that you are enough in all of your frailty. Not because you're so great, not because you're so skilled, not because you're so good looking, not because of your status, but because he put his stamp on you. He called you out of darkness. He called you into his marvelous light. You are good enough because of Jesus. That's the name that is above every name. That is the name that demons tremble at. That is the name that we bow down and that we worship at his throne. So this morning, I want you to know, do not quit. Don't give up. You might have lost some things along the way. You might have lost a spouse. You might have lost your house. You might have lost a car. But God said to keep on loving. God said to keep on living. God said to keep on believing. You might lose the job or the contract, but keep the faith. Some of you might feel like you have nothing left to lose. And let me help you. That might be a perfect place for you to be in. So you might as well continue believing. Why should I continue believing? KP, I'm glad that you asked me because I was sent this morning to tell you about somebody named El Shaddai. El Shaddai, the God of enough. And it's the same God of enough who lives in you. And if you dwell in him, you can conquer anything. In God I live, in God I move, and in God I have my very being. And so I can declare in him that I now have the victory. In him I have joy. In him I have peace. I'm trying so hard to get these things done, but if I rely on him, then I know the truth. The truth is, the Bible says that if you shall know the truth. And here's the thing, I used to believe that I wasn't good enough, that I couldn't overcome my battles, that I couldn't face the giants because they were too big. But now I know the truth, and the truth has set me free. Now, it set me free, and I believe that this is also Black History Month, so I just want to tell you that now I'm free at last. Free at last. Thank God Almighty. I'm free at last. And I want to declare that over all of you as well. We are free at last in the name of Jesus. Give God some praise for him being more than that. I'm getting ready to close, but I want to tell you before I do that there's a masterful attraction between our weakness and God's strength. So when I was looking at my feet, I'm thinking about those leaders who came back and they said, "We see all of this. We can't face it. We see all these issues and we can't deal with them." I'm thinking about Paul. He said, "The least of them, I was like a stillborn baby. I was dead." I'm looking at my feet. I'm hearing Cato say, "We can conquer them." And I'm hearing Paul say, "What by the grace of God?" And I'm seeing this connection between what I say and what I do, and what I believe, and where I get you. So what if I'm taking a few small steps? I'm making steps anyway. Because there's a masterful attraction between my weakness, my frailty, and the strength of God. I realize that me and God are like the Wonder Twins. When we put our powers together, we activate into something big. We're like Captain Planet, like the Power Rangers. I might be dating myself. I don't know anything to do with that. But when we come together, God and I, something happens. My weakness is made perfect. It's a place for God to make his power perfect. I hear God saying, "So let the weak say, I am strong. The poor say, I'm rich. The Israelites were deterred from attaining the land flowing with milk and honey because they were convinced that they were not enough to take on the challenges before them. The interesting thing about that scenario about the land of milk and honey are considered kosher in the Jewish culture. They're kosher. But the thing that they come from is not. Pastor Tim, I think you'll appreciate this. We had a conversation about some ravens once. How ravens, they come and we don't expect, they're not there to give you something, but there's a story in the Bible about how God sent ravens. It reminded me of this reminded me of the ravens because cows are not kosher. Bees are not kosher. God said, I'm giving you what they produce. It's possible that the thing that God has for you won't come from something that you expect it to come from. The thing that you might not expect it to come from might be your own two hands. It might be from the work that you put in. Great things can be done when you connect with the power of God. Possible that you are struggling to attain the very thing that God promised you because it isn't coming from where you thought, but it's being birthed out of you through every challenge, the situation that you face, the perspective of not being enough of those things has to shift. Because happiness, Pastor Tim said this on Facebook, as a matter of fact, happiness starts within. It's not the external things. It's with how we see ourselves. And if we don't see ourselves in God, we won't feel like we're enough. My job is not to make you shout, run around the church. My job is not necessarily to hype you up. But if I did my job, then it's to make you go home and pray, be introspective. Think about the places where you feel insecure. There's a lot of talent, a lot of skill, a lot of ability in this room. God didn't call you here for no reason. God called you here. He said, because in me, you are enough. The anxieties, put them down. Recognize that when I connect with the Savior, I have everything that I need. In fact, I have more than enough. Believe that God is going to use your voice. God is going to use your skills. It's time for you and I to stop hiding behind or leaning on the rubber crutches and standing behind social media, standing behind the facade of who we want people to believe that we are. God wants you to be authentically you. He wants you to know that you are enough. You are enough for the relationship, the husband, for the wife. You are enough for the job. You are enough for the task at hand. God will use your singing. He'll use your art. He'll use your preaching. Use your ministry, use your talents on the keyboard, use your talents to serve, to make an impact, not just in Fredericksburg, it's a ripple effect, to be a blessing to people all across the world. Grove Church, I pray that you come to a place within yourself if you feel this way. And I get it, not everybody feels like there's something that they can't do or that. Not everybody feels, sometimes people feel like they are. I can be honest about it. There's so many places where I feel weak. So many places where I just don't feel like I can do it. But with God, all things are possible. Stand to your feet, give God a big round of praise. face this week. Whatever feelings you have when you go home, lay your head down at night, and everything's quiet, and you begin to rehearse those things that have been insecurities in your life since you were a child, the things that people said you couldn't do, didn't realize how they would affect you into adulthood. You go home to replay in your mind, but I am what I am. Not because of my own skill, but because of the grace of God. Not out, but Him. I invite you, Pastor Tim, if you want to do it, I'm not sure. I invite you to come to the altar this morning. This altar call for those who have felt like there's something that God is calling them to do. They feel like there's more that God has for them. There's this nagging voice in your head saying that I'm not enough. This altar calls for people who have been struggling with anxiety, who have been struggling with stress, who have been struggling with depression. This is an altar call for you to come lay down those burdens at His feet. God said we are to come to His throne of grace with boldness. That means with our truth, our honesty, that whatever it is that we are facing and that we are experiencing, we can be totally honest with Him. He won't judge us. He won't talk about us, get on the phone and call another friend and say, hey, I'll tell you what so-and-so told me. This is an interaction between you and God. This is an opportunity that regardless of what you are dealing with in your life, that you are certain enough God dwells within you. If you come to the altar, I implore you just to talk to God. God, help me to surrender the places where I don't feel like I'm enough. Help me to stop struggling to do it all on my own. This is the place of brokenness. Sometimes, I'm seeing a red bird, people break bone. In order to get it readjusted, it has to be broken again. God will put you back into alignment, and sometimes it'll be painful. God said that my grace is sufficient for you. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you this morning. We thank you, God, for your grace. We recognize, God, that there are so many places in our lives where we try to control it all. Would you set boundaries for us? And within those boundaries, God, you said these are the things that I've called you to do. I never called you to fight your battles by yourself. I called you to call on the great I am. I am enough for you. I am enough for your situation. I am that I am. I am El Shaddai. I am more than enough. I am the God of the situation. And this is the opportunity to give it over to me. I will not walk in control. I will not worry and stress. But this week I will go home. And I will lay down and I will sleep. And I will have the most peaceful rest. Because I'm no longer trying to carry the burden on my shoulders. but I give it over to you. The government of my mind, I place it on your shoulders. And I thank you, God, for giving me such a freedom in you that I no longer have to worry. I no longer have to stress. All I have to do is get back to a place where I remember that you are God and you are God alone. So God, I thank you. We praise you. We honor you. We lift you up. We magnify your name. We give you glory in this place because you are so big, God. We magnify a God who is as big as he will ever get, and yet we blow you up in our lives. That the giants we face, God, we thank you that you stand behind us bigger as we bow down. Look at our own 2 feet. Remember how frail we are. Oh, but there is a God who orders our steps. So we thank you, God. We bless you. We praise you, God. We say hallelujah. In Jesus' name we say amen and amen. Give God Reverend said, you are enough. But to get that, you'll need King Jesus. So be here today. You need to have Christ to cover the Lord of your Savior and the rest of the hand up. Is that one? Is that one? Are we all good? Are we all good? Amen. Thank God again for that word. What God had me preach for the past 2 weeks ago. Numbers 13, right? I was like, look at God. Look at God. So I love that. Thanks for your obedience today and preaching it to us today. It's so good for us. 2 announcements. First announcement is, if you're here today and you want to take the next step in your relationship with Jesus Christ, you do one thing right now. There is a table in the back on the right hand side right here. Next step means you want to get baptized today. You want to be a part of a serve team, volunteer, give back, bring God your time and treasure. You can do that today as well. And then the second thing I want to say for today is simply, and then next week, everybody, we start next steps for the month of February. So you have not yet taken next steps. It's going to be next Sunday, part 1. And then third Sunday, part 2. Got it? And then also, last thing I'll say is next Sunday, I'm starting a new sermon series. It's entitled, Are You Sick? So I think it's going to be transformational for at least me. Maybe I hope y'all too. But it's going to help transform me a lot. It's entitled, Are You Sick? So bring somebody this week, buddy, friends, life books going to be incredible. And let us pray. We're going to pray this out. Let's take that Brother Kevin again. Let's bow. Heavenly Father, we thank you, God. We thank you, God, for your gracious gift. God, your Son, Jesus Christ, Lord God. Father God, we pray right now that every heart has been touched. We pray, God, that you have given us exactly what we need
to face our battles. We thank you, God, that you are more than enough for us, that you give us everything that we need. Now, God, as we prepare to leave this place, we pray that no hurt, harm, danger, incident, or accident shall come against us. And God, we pray that we will leave this place with power, but we won't leave it without your presence. God, we thank you. We honor you. Bless Growth Church in the name of Jesus. And will impact this area. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.